Okay, we're going to spend a lot of time today looking ahead to tomorrow's inauguration. I've got a fascinating conversation with California Governor Gavin Newsom to show you, but I do want to start with that breaking news out of the Middle East, where just moments ago, 3 hostages were released as a long-awaited ceasefire is now underway in Gaza. Now, the 3 women are now back in Israel, where they will receive medical checks and treatment before making their way home to be reunited with all of their friends and family. You can see video right there on your screen here of the families of these hostages watching them as they joined IDF soldiers overcome with emotion and relief. Huge crowds also gathered in Tel Aviv's Hostage Square today, celebrating and cheering as the news of this hostage release came in. A total of 33 hostages are expected to be released during this first phase of the ceasefire, which lasts for 6 weeks, in exchange for the release of a number of Palestinian prisoners. NBC News has also just learned that the first American to be released will be 65-year-old Keith Siegel on day 14 of the ceasefire. And that will be 36-year-old, and after that will be 36-year-old Saki Dekelhen, who is injured as well. And the other 5 Americans, alive and dead, will not be released until phase 2 of the ceasefire. That is from NBC reporting. I'm going to talk about it with my next guest. And along with the release of the hostages, we saw another welcome sign today. Aid trucks have started to cross into Gaza, bringing much-needed relief to a region that has been suffering. 600 trucks of aid will be able to enter Gaza each day, a significant increase from what has been allowed to date. Now, this ceasefire deal took months of painstaking diplomacy between the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. And just in the last hour, President Biden delivered remarks on the release of those 3 hostages.
3 Israeli women held against their will in the dark tunnels for 470 days. 4 more women will be released in 7 days. 3 additional hostages every 7 days thereafter, including at least 2 American citizens in this first phase. We pray for them and their families. They're going to be a long recovery ahead. We got here without a wider war in the Middle East than many predicted. And now it falls on the next administration to help implement this deal. I was pleased to have our team speak as one voice in the final days. It was both necessary and effective and unprecedented. But success is going to require persistence and continuing support for our friends in the region and the belief in diplomacy backed by deterrence.
Starting us off today is White House Deputy National Security Advisor Jon Finer, who is on his second to last day in the job. I'm grateful to you for taking the time. We've known each other a long time. We've spent a lot of time traveling overseas in diplomatic talks. It doesn't always result in a positive outcome. And I just wanted to ask you, I mean, anybody who's read the reporting knows this took dozens of trips by Brett McGurk, by Tony Blinken, by Bill Burns, involvement by you, by Jake Sullivan, of course, by the president. What is it like watching the video of these hostages being returned, of the families celebrating?
No, it's a really good point, Jen, because as you well know, you don't get a lot of good days in foreign policy. Often it's managing really hard problems and choosing among least bad options. So when there is an unequivocally happy moment, like seeing those 3 hostages come out of Gaza this morning, it is nice to take a minute to reflect. Now, the reality is, though, implementing this deal is going to be a challenge. And because of that, and because the 6-week period for implementation extends into the new administration, President Biden has directed us to be totally transparent, totally open, and integrated with the incoming Trump team. They were involved in the talks. They played an important supporting role, and it'll now be on them to make sure this deal gets implemented as the president just described.
And I want to ask you about that as well. But one of the questions I wanted to start with here is just about the status of the Americans. And NBC News, I mentioned this in the opening here, reported this morning that the first American to be released will be 65-year-old Keith Siegel on day 14 of the ceasefire, because it's every 7 days. So that would be one between now and then. After that would be 36-year-old Saki Dekelhen, who is also injured, then the other 5 Americans in the second phase. Is that accurate?
So the way this deal is structured is that the people who come out in phase 1 of the deal are people who are wounded, are women, and are what is defined as elderly under the terms of this deal, basically people over the age of 50, which hits a little close to home if you're close to 50. But that's how the deal defines elderly. And so the theory there is the most vulnerable people are the ones who should come out first. We see 2 Americans in that category, the 2 that you just mentioned. After that, phase 2, there'll be a negotiation for how to start phase 2. It'll be IDF soldiers who come out in that second phase. And then in the third phase, remains of hostages who tragically did not survive would come out. Phase 2 is when the war ends definitively with a permanent ceasefire.
But for people who are waiting for an American to come back, obviously amazing footage, amazing news about these 3 Israeli women today, and one of them is a British citizen. Keith Siegel, we should anticipate not until 2 weeks from today.
So I'm not going to confirm exactly which date, which people are going to come out. I think there's going to be some work between now and then to determine who comes out on what date. But that rough timeline is, I think, what we should expect.
You mentioned this earlier, and Jake Sullivan and the president, you have all been very effusive in thanking the incoming Trump administration, Steve Witkoff specifically, for their work and efforts in this process. It's important to restate, I think, that this is the same plan as was proposed in May, that there have been, again, as I noted earlier, dozens of trips by Biden high-level national security officials to get here. Trump and Netanyahu obviously have a close relationship, a closer one than Biden. Why do you think now?
Well, as you say, I think the president laid out the broad contours, the elements of this deal back in May. There was some fine print to be worked out, but if you look at the deal that actually now appears on paper, it is more or less exactly what the president described back then. But there was a lot of work that had to take place between now and then. There were tragic incidents that took place between now and then, including the murder of several hostages by Hamas, including one American, which we all mourned and were outraged by. All of that made this take longer, I think, than many of us wanted. And at the end of the day, the president identified, even when attention moved on from the press, from other governments, the president almost every single day would call Jake Sullivan or me or others on the team to say, what is going on with the hostage negotiations? How can I help? Is there someone I should call? Should we be sending someone out to the region? He stayed on top of this. And as you say, we deployed constantly. And when it got close to the end of the administration and became clear that implementation would go into a new term, he asked us, bring them in, tell them what's going on, make sure they're comfortable with the approach, and see if they're going to be willing to help. Now, you know as well as I do, we don't agree with 100% of what the new administration is likely to do on a whole range of things. I'll let them speak to their policy. But on this issue, there was an alignment of interests and an alignment of messaging publicly to the Israelis and behind the scenes.
There's no question. I mean, you gave them credit for getting Netanyahu to kind of come to the table at this moment in time. The negotiation for a second phase, though, is going to require maybe the Israelis giving some things up that they don't want to give up. Trump has basically said that Netanyahu should have unfettered freedom to move forward with military action. Is that the biggest concern about moving forward to a second phase, or is there something else?
So that negotiation begins a couple of weeks into the deal. So, stay tuned for exactly how that will proceed. And it is what determines whether we go from phase 1 to phase 2, the permanent ceasefire that ends the war. Everything we're told by our incoming Trump administration counterparts is that they have every intention of bringing this deal all the way through phase 2 and phase 3. They're the ones that are going to have to help foster that negotiation. We wish them every luck in doing so and think that would be a very good thing. And if there are ways we can be helpful, I'm sure we will.
Let me ask you about TikTok. I know you're very present on TikTok. You're not. I'm joking. But Donald Trump announced this morning in a post that he was going to sign an executive order to delay the implementation. Anyone who went on TikTok this morning couldn't go on TikTok. Mike Johnson said this morning that he thinks it will be an effort to move forward to a sale to an American company. Is that the only way that this could meet the national security standards Trump identified in his statement, or how could those standards be met?
So, Jen, it's not just national security standards. There's a piece of legislation, as you know, that lays out exactly what is required now under the law. And I'm not going to parse the details or interpret it other than to say, and I think this is important, the last couple of days, this administration, the Biden administration, which is still in office until tomorrow, has been quite clear. We are not going to take any actions that require the drastic step that TikTok decided to take by pulling its platform down. We said that quite publicly. They made a different choice. I think there are clearly conversations going on between TikTok and the new administration, so we'll let those play out. But nothing we said or we did would have required them to take the action that they took.
Clearly discussion since they thanked Trump in the holding place if you open TikTok this morning. Jon Finer, thank you for your work. Thank you for